Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I'm sorry for the delay. If I'm being honest, I got reading. I started reading. I started and forgot for the moment that I was reading for the point of doing the fucking show. I was looking up, so I came across an article just before I started the other show. And Julian Assange's birthday, right? Well, a court has just issued an arrest warrant for the president that gave Assange asylum. Happy birthday! Happy birthday! Let me check my mic. I'm sorry. I'm just checking the audio to make sure this is intact. This story is weird. This story is weird, and I gotta be honest, I'm not sure fully what to think about it. And so, my rule is you just put everything on the table for everybody and let them make their choice, because who the fuck knows? There's nobody to know for sure. In a nutshell, Correa, I may pronounce his name wrong, gave Julian Assange asylum. Now, let's chop a little wood first from the standpoint of what's taking place in Ecuador, or what was taking place in Ecuador. The United States, I think I forget the exact date, but 18 something, late 1880s, put forth the Monroe Doctrine. Whatever takes place in this sphere of the hemisphere is our business. Now, at that point, we hadn't got to this imperialistic stage, but we damn sure had gotten to the point where we started to know our strength or flex our muscles in the region. But understand, this doctrine has been used for vicious effect, going from one coup, one military conquest, one proxy war after the next, all throughout South America. Dude, there's this awesome story. United Fruit. It's not awesome. It's actually pretty horrible. United Fruit had started getting all sorts of interest in the region, meaning we're going to build your area for you. However, we want all sorts of land for the first point because we want to get our bananas, but we also want control over the infrastructure. This money and this influence led to more deals, in which case certain corrupt leaders in the country would get huge amounts of money, and they would use that in order to essentially advantage United Fruit. There was populist upheaval in Guatemala, pushing for workers' rights, basic workers' rights. If I'm not mistaken, it was a 40-hour work week or something to that effect, or essentially a shortening of the work week. But it was essentially basic worker rights, and I think the right to form unions. Do you know that when that populist government got elected, they brought Edward Bernays into Guatemala to take pictures and to get movie scripts and everything else, and to create a propaganda flick to poured around the United States in order to convince senators in the United States government that there was a communist revolt in Guatemala. The United States government pushed forth a coup in order to take down the main person, the president of that country, and put in their hack, in which case all the reforms that were promised were rolled back, and United Fruit had their man in office. All it took was the destruction of a democracy. I'm making a point that we have influenced all sorts of affairs in these states, or in these nations. And Ecuador wasn't immune to that. Now, the catch here is the last president had a chip on his shoulder about this. Not in a bad way, but definitely had this full understanding of, we are a nation state, like any other nation state, and you will respect us as such. In one of the cases, I love this case, he ended this idea of having a military base in Ecuador. The United States wanted one. He says, look, you can get a military base in Ecuador if we get a military base in Florida. It's only fair. I mean, after all, why do you get to have one there and here when we can't have one there? Of course, that wasn't going to go anywhere. The new president who's there, who exceeded him, doesn't necessarily have that particular perspective when it comes to this idea of a sovereign state. Or at the very least, a sovereign state that doesn't have the degree of United States influence that the United States influence has had in the past. Because immediately after taking office, guess who signed a military deal? Or guess who signed a military agreement with the United States. Ding, ding, ding. The new president. So the previous president has called this one a traitor. He's a traitor. Essentially, he wolves in sheep's clothing. When he initially was succeeded to office, Correa was okay with this. Well, not now. And in fact, the new president, I can't remember his name, I'm sorry, has taken over to the point of even putting a ceiling on the number of how long a president can stay in office, which essentially prevents the previous president from running for office again. Politics is blood sport. I keep saying it. Here's an interesting point and why this is in the news. An arrest warrant was issued for this president, for Correa, the previous president, the president that gave Assange asylum. The reason why he issues an arrest warrant is because they're saying that the president, Correa, was involved in a kidnapping of a political opponent who fled to Colombia. Let me just read the story because this is it's such a weird story, and there are elements of the story where you could be like, okay, maybe, and there are other elements where you're like, I can see it both ways, and I don't know which one it is. So I'm just going to read through the story as it presents. The reason I'm reading through it because I can't get the names right. To summarize, the previous president, Correa, while he was in office, a political opponent, tried to take over the government. Essentially, was instrumental in a coup that failed to try to take over the government. He fled to Colombia. While he was in Colombia, he was kidnapped and held for several hours. The police eventually broke this up. Now, as the police broke this up, he was shipped back to Ecuador, in which case he was stood trial and was convicted of trying to overthrow the government of Ecuador. The kidnap is the problem, because the kidnapping is apparently against the law. And because it's against the law, the judge has said, we need you to present yourself to an Ecuadorian court every 2 weeks, because the prosecutor is looking into charging him for this crime, saying that he is implicated. In fact, it's gone so far to say that the previous president, the one that gave Assange asylum, is author of this crime. I read this story and I first thought was bullshit. Bullshit. And then the second thought was, well, how do you know that's bullshit? You don't live in Ecuador. You don't live in Ecuador. You're such a cynical SOB. You don't even live in Ecuador. You're talking about bullshit. And so I was like, fine, let me read through this, which is why it took longer for me to give this story. There's a problem for the president, for the previous president. Who approved the charges? If the prosecutor is right, and I'm saying if, because again, I don't live in Ecuador. I don't necessarily know what the prosecutor has. If the prosecutor is right, and he was the one that approved the charges, because the person who actually went to Colombia to try to do the kidnapping was one of the people in the Ecuadorian military, or one of the people in his circle, let's say Ecuadorian guard of some degree, some police force, or some militarist police force that he was aware of. If that's true, and he was the one that approved this, given Assange asylum or not, that sounds bad. The thing I have here is, though, the guy tried to fucking overthrow the government, which also gives me this idea that there may have been an incentive to actually do it. It's like, that rat bastard tried to take me out my office. Get him. And then it comes back later on saying that's against the law. And he's like, I want to prosecute him because he tried to have me extradited, or rendition. Essentially what we're talking about is rendition. We're talking about rendition. And now they're going after him for it. He's saying this is BS. He's saying that the current president is putting pressure on the prosecutor in order to press these charges, and that he's trying to destroy his reputation. Let's take a look at it. You judge for yourself, because look, the incentives do go. The incentives lead in both ways, and I don't know which. In one case, you can say, does the previous president have an incentive to go after the guy that tried to overthrow the government? Fuck yes, of course. Yes. Why are we having this debate? Yes. Now, he goes to Colombia. He's like, get him. You have the capacity to get him. Now, the goal is to not get caught, of course, because the moment that you get caught, the jig is up. But is there an incentive there? Yes. Just because there's an incentive there doesn't mean he did it. No. He still gets the benefit of the doubt. That being said, if you've approved charges, it looks bad. Let's take a look at this. And the sad part about this is, I don't even know if I completely disagree with the extraordinary rendition. The guy tried to overthrow the government. I would prefer you work with the authorities from the Colombia standpoint and not necessarily invade another country to try to get the guy. I can't say that. Look, in a world where everybody's trustworthy, in a world where everyone is honest, I would say, hey, good on Ecuador for essentially saying we are not going to allow the president of this country to exceed our laws in this way, where they're going into other countries in order to kidnap people. But we don't live in a fair and just world, and ultimately it's very possible that he is being a political actor in the way that they're going about trying to go after this previous president. So, I don't know which it is, and it could be a little bit of both. Ecuador judge orders Belgian-based ex-president Correa be jailed. An Ecuadorian judge on Tuesday ordered the ex-president Rafael Correa to be jailed as part of a case involving kidnapping of a lawmaker, setting up a showdown with the Belgium-based leftist politician who vowed to appeal and defy the order. I don't blame him. Keep my ass out of jail, too. If you're in Belgium, you better stay in Belgium. In 2012, former opposition lawmaker Fernando Balda was briefly kidnapped in neighboring Colombia, where he fled after being sentenced to 2 years in prison for slander against Correa. It was more than slander. He tried to take over the goddamn government. What is he talking about? Prosecutor seeks to link ex-president Rafael Correa to alleged 2012 kidnapping. Yeah, I know that part. I'm trying to get to the point that it wasn't just slander. As Reuters, you're utterly worthless. Correa, who governed the Andean country for nearly a decade, has always said he had nothing to do with the incident, and has accused his successor, Lenin Moreno. Good. I thought it was Moreno. I didn't want to say it because I couldn't remember the name. I remember the name Moreno, but I wasn't sure if that was right. Seeking to smear his administration for political gain. The state prosecutor's office in June requested that Correa be linked to the proceeding as author of the incident. Judge Danileta Camacho accepted that request and ordered Correa, who's living in Belgium, where his wife is from, to present himself in Ecuadorian courts every 2 weeks. Instead, Correa on Monday presented himself to Ecuadorian consulate in Belgium, which the judge on Tuesday termed a violation of her orders. Judge Danileta Camacho receives the prosecutor's request and orders preventative prison for ex-president Rafael Correa for his alleged participation in the crime of illicit association and kidnapping. The Ecuadorian prosecutor's office said on Twitter, Jesus Christ, we're doing this on Twitter now. All right. A request will be submitted to Interpol for his capture with the aim of extraditing him. The irony is, the kidnapping was somewhat of an extraditing itself, just beyond the Constitution. We do it all the time in the United States. Nobody cares. Correa lawyer, Capricolton Ocheo, said the decision was a result of a political pressure from Moreno, who was once an ally of Correa but turned on his mentor after being elected last year. This decision is arbitrary. It is a lie. It is defamatory. I do not believe they're seeking justice but revenge, Ochoa told journalists at the end of the hearing, adding he would appeal. Right after the decision, Correa tweeted that any attempt to jail him will fail. Will fail. I love the defiance in that. I'm well, do not worry, Correa tweeted. This will seek to humiliate us and make us suffer a tough time. But a monstrosity like this will never prosper in a country like Belgium with rule of law. I love that, man. It's talking shit from overseas. I love it. He said, any attempt to jail him will fail. I love that. He's like, any attempt to... That's what I have in my head anyway. He's shaking his fist at the judiciary in Ecuador. Any attempt to jail me will fail. It would fail. As long as I stay in Belgium. All right, fair enough. Ecuador is a beautiful country, but, you know, there are worse places to seek asylum. And by the way, it wasn't slander. He tried to take over the government. Ecuador's Attorney General office is seeking to involve President Rafael Correa in the case investigating the kidnapping of a former Congressman, Fernando Balda, that occurred in August 2012 in Bogota, according to a communique released Monday. Let's see. Where is it? Where is it? I want to get into the meat of the details of the case with Balda, because that case gets interesting. Because look, we're cynical SOBs. We know that they were keeping Assange. We know that the United States wants Assange. We know that in wanting Assange, the new president that comes in does not take the same disposition as the previous president that went out, meaning Correa. Moreno is a different animal altogether. Correa has called him a traitor. This idea of Ecuadorian sovereignty, feeling like he has given up some of it to the United States' interests. Will these guys be dicks to the point of trying to go after Correa for seeking or assisting Assange? Maybe. By the same token, I could be extraordinarily myopic and only looking at this from the lens of a political actor, from the context of my association with Ecuador, if that makes sense. From a larger point, this may have nothing to do with Assange at all. It may have everything to do with the political disposition between these two. Whatever is going on between these two, this could be a result of that. Or it could also be that he broke the law by paying somebody to go after and extradite a guy who tried to overthrow the government. Which one is true? Which one is true? When you lose trust, man, where do you put your feet on the ground? Fernando Balda, what the hell? Fernando Balda, who is a former lawmaker with the right-wing opposition Patriotic Society Party, was charged of conspiring to overthrow the government of Rafael Correa as part of a failed September 2010 coup against former president, which led mainly by dissident police forces. However, he was in Colombia at the time of the charges, and thus his prosecution was put on hold. In October 2012, Balda was deported from Colombia because he had been in the country without immigration permission, and he was required to face the charges against him on 2012. In January the following year, he was convicted of the crime of threatening the state security, and a month later he was sentenced to 1 year in prison for that crime, as well as giving false information which affected the honor of the state. Now, what the hell is Reuters talking about? Slander? Slander. Correa. Well, where is it? Where is it? Because I want to make a point here. That's a big goddamn difference between these two things. If I read this and... Where is it? Where is it? Request from Belgium, present Ecuador. Of course, instead, Correa, right. Ecuadorian court. Oh, okay. What am I missing? I could have swore this was longer. The Ecuadorian judge on Tuesday reported Correa, right? Okay, here we are. In 2012, former opposition lawmaker Fernando Baldo was briefly kidnapped in neighboring Colombia, where he had fled after being sentenced to 2 years in prison for slander. What do you mean slander? What the hell are you talking about? He was convicted of threatening state security. They're talking about he tried to have a coup. All right, whatever, man. That is a massive yada yada. That is a massive yada yada. That term slander is holding a lot of shit behind it. And it matters. There's a difference in those things. Like, I'm trying to say it matters even from the perspective of the incentives that are in the process. He said a bad thing about me is a difference than this guy tried to overthrow the state. It also gets across the level of ire that Correa might have had in that office at somebody who actually tried to overthrow his state and fled to Colombia. Part of the problem for Correa here is that apparently he may have actually paid for it through state funds, which is even worse. You got to be like Reagan, man. If you're going to do something like that, you got to do that shit off the books. You got to actually, get the money from somewhere else, like drugs or something. It's what we do. Yeah, I just want to give a heads up on this. I hope I hit the angles on this right. But yeah, this is amazing. Julian Assange's birthday. Go figure. Go figure. So, right here. Ecuador Attorney General's office is attempting to involve former President Rafael Correa in the case involving the kidnapping of former Congressman Fernando Baldo that occurred August 2012 in Bogota, according to the communique released. Right. The Attorney General, Paul Perez, sent the request on May 31st to the National Court alleging Correa's participation in kidnapping, considered as a potential state crime involving state officials and public funds. According to the investigation, the Ecuadorian presidency would have approved the funds when Correa was in charge. On one day before the information was made public, Correa tweeted, "Ecuador is completely out of the law. They appointed in a total illegal way a friend as the Attorney General and asked him to send me to court on any grounds. As a result, without any evidence, they will link me to the Baldo case over kidnapping." Look, he could be right. He could be right. Maybe the reason that they give the news in the way of an authoritative way is because ultimately there's no way to know what's taking place. It's easier to just say, this is what's happening. I think real life is more messier than this. I think it could be a combination of both. It could be a little bit of both. Yes, I could totally see why somebody would send somebody to grab the guy who tried to take down the state. If I'm being honest, I might do the same thing. By the same token, I could also maybe see there would be friction between two people and a person might want to edge this on a bit. Especially when there's an association between the United States and this new government. Keeping Assange was a thumb in the eye. And when they try to put that thumb back in his eye, I don't know. I wouldn't put that past any of them, which is kind of the problem. We're looking at the world like this. Too bad someone with a helicopter can't break him loose like a mob did in France. Did you see that? Yeah, that's amazing. Sponsored by Twix now, are we? What are you talking about sponsored by Twix? Trudy, I have too much trouble with the emoticons to use that shit. I'm an emoticon failure. Oh, Trudy, pick yourself up. Don't beat yourself up over that. There are worse things to be. I don't even think we need to rely on selling drugs and guns to fund this shit anymore. No, we don't. They're simply grabbing trillions from us. Trillions are straight up missing us. Yeah. Do you remember I did that article in 2015? $5 trillion. Poof. Just gone. Nobody says anything about it. Nobody bitches about it. Nobody complains about it. We've lost more money just out of thin fucking air than will take place for the entire national debt. We don't have automated rail. We don't have... I want my fucking hover cars. If we're going to spend $20 trillion like this, I want a fucking hover car. I want to go from point A to point B with the maglev train. I'd settle for a maglev train going from one side of the country to the next. I want a hyperloop. I want to go at fantastic speeds that if anything would happen, people would just die in a ball of flames, but nothing happens because we spent so much fucking money on it that we know that it works the right way. $20 trillion. That's what we've spent. And what do you have to show for that money? Nothing. Nothing. You've been killing people across the globe in order to maintain your economy. You have nothing to show for it. If that doesn't piss you off, it should. And this fucking hashtag resistance of the Democratic Party is not going to be the expression of that anger. It needs something else. From Personal Initiation to Global Transformation, book by Daniel Pinchbeck. But we have lots of bombs, Harold Hedge. Unfortunately, we have a lot of bombs, yes. We have a lot of bombs. Trudy, when I was a child, poor whites like me worked in the fields. Then along came Chavez, and we had to move up. See, I know people make that argument. Trudy, it's not the immigrant, man. Like, and I don't know if that's the way you're going with it, but it's not the immigrant. Like, you look at your society, and I don't like this pitting one bottom slant of the economic distribution against another, because I think it's a false argument. You have trillions of dollars missing. Why are you so focused on this bottom part? Again, I'm not saying that's you, Trudy. I'm just saying. Just from the standpoint of the way we look at this stuff. I was looking at the numbers on immigration today, meaning the public itself and what the public thought of immigration. I was floored. Democrats are going to lose this debate on immigration. What do you do when your perspective is not the perspective shared by the rest of the country? What do you do when you think the rest of the country is wrong? And not just wrong, you even to some degree understand why they're wrong, why they're disillusioned, why they're pissed off, why they're holding on to the little shit that they have to fuck away. That's your world. Rats in a cage fighting for every little slice. I can understand why they would behave that way. I can understand why they would act that way. But they are acting against their self-interest. Trillions, like Gardone said, trillions have been lost. Poof, gone away. You spent trillions of dollars killing people across the globe. And none of that stuff was necessarily used here. That stuff went to a top 1%. When Obama took office, these guys bailed out the banks. Literally, we're going to protect the bankers, but we're going to let the homeowners go bust. They could have taken that money and gave to the bottom part of the economic distribution scale and paid off student loans and paid off those people's houses. And guess what? You would have gotten a magnificent bounce because that money would have been a bottom to the top as opposed to giving it to the bankers who had immediately proceeded to not loan it to anybody. You should have bought those banks and bought each and every one of them out and had a major stake in all of the banks in this country. Why do you need the banks in the first place? Have public banks. Let public banks run the system in the way that they need to run the system. I am through with this idea that we need to protect these edifices of Wall Street. In that moment in 2008 where they were completely bust and bankrupt, when Obama went into that room, he should have bought the lot of them. Turn them public. Fuck them. That's where I'm at. Pet hacker, creative experiments, the good jobs are being lost, HB1 visas, and no one is stopping those. We need a new system. I'm sorry. The problem is the model. We're at each other's throats with this idea of, it's aggravating because it's not the immigrant. It's not the person who's coming into the country. I'm sorry, it's not. I understand the way people are looking at it. I understand where they're in this kind of pressure cooker environment where they feel like they're barely making ends meet. Your jobs are being shipped overseas. That's the first point. Your jobs are being replaced by machines. That's the second point. Those things are natural factors within the capitalistic system. A capitalist is going to ship that job overseas because they can pay the person less. He's a capitalist. He's not there to give you a job. He's there to maximize his profit. Giving you a job is just secondary to the process. If he could get a job done without giving you a job, he would do that because that way he can maximize his profit. Same thing goes with putting a machine in an office. If they could put a machine in an office instead of putting a person in an office, they're going to put a machine in an office because it's going to reap higher profits. It has nothing to do with societal benefit. It doesn't. All of these talks about job creators is nonsense. They do what they need to do to make a profit. If that means putting in a job, that's great. If it doesn't, great. Now, the last part to this is, there's this odd idea that this stuff trickles down. It doesn't. It doesn't. The government itself can come in and replace what these guys miss, but they hate this idea because they don't necessarily want to compete with the government. That's what this boils down to. The catch to this is, however, that if it was me, I would have bought the lot of them, and I would have used some of those resources to pay down national debt. Why not? Get creative. $20 trillion in debt. Those banks fucked up royally. I'm not saying you're going to keep them forever, but I am saying that you would keep them to the tune or to the degree that it helps the public. But I'm further to the left than most. I would also nationalize the railways, nationalize the energy markets. I think I'm right. I mean, I would do that, and it's funny, Firestone disagree with me on this. Your energy systems is destroying your planet. Why do you want that to be completely at the interest of private interests, whose only job is to maximize profit? They don't care about the societal benefits or the societal defects in the way they go about their affairs. They don't care. They care about maximizing profit. They are within a fictional reality, in which case profit, this ethereal, not real thing, is the thing that they want to push for, even at the expense of real world. There's an asteroid that's going to hit the planet, and these guys are quibbling over what chairs to dick about in. That's a problem. They shouldn't have control of that particular apparatus when their point is not necessarily the thing, meaning the energy production itself, nor is it one of those things that pays attention to the society's defects in what they're doing. So no, they shouldn't have control over that particular thing. There's some spheres of influence where I would say, yes, fuck all, have at it. That's not one of them. That's not one of them. As for railways, same thing. Same thing. If transportation is such an industry where it's not necessarily profitable, if I'm not mistaken, Amtrak is government owned to some degree. Look, there's some things that we should do as a society for each other. And travel, rail, that's one of them. That's one of them. What your idea on selling off New Jersey to Asgard and Wakanda 50-50? You know what's funny, bold like a leopard. In the comic books, Asgard did land on Earth, but I don't think it was in Jersey. It was in somewhere else. And that was, yeah. Oh, dude, don't get me talking about comic books. Don't get me talking about comic books. Amtrak loses money. Pat Hacker. Yeah. But that's kind of my point. The government doesn't have to run a business for money. The goal of it is not for money. The goal of it is public interest. If it needs to go and lose money on it, fuck it. Lose money on it. So what? It's our property. We can make a choice on determining what to do, what we want to do with it. The goal of that is not to gain or maximize profit. I guess that's my point. That's my point. If it was a public enterprise, that's my point. Explain what you believe debt is, Fred. New Jersey isn't worth much, maybe $1. Oh, that's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. And no one should make massive profits on the necessities of life. No, they should not. And I would argue that it is the government's responsibility to step in as a collective and make that choice of saying, yes, we are going to supply the necessities of life. There is nobody that is going to go hungry. There is nobody that is going to go without a house. What is the point of a government if it can't do the basic fucking things? Yeah, what's the point of government if it can't do those basic things? What's the point? Did Asgard land in Florida because Odin wanted to retire? No, hard. All right, hard as hell. So in the comic books, it's one, in the movies, it's another. In the comic books, it lands in a I forget which part of the United States, but when Asgard is destroyed, it's reformed in a different part of the States. In the movies, I don't think he landed Asgard in Florida. I think he was just walking around in Florida. Amtrak is not profitable, but 1% want to shut it down because it competes with aircraft, right? It never gets what it needs to run properly. And they do the same thing in the United Kingdom. They underfund the National Health Service. And what they would do is they would say, well, look, we gave X amount of billions to the National Health Service, but is that enough to make it run properly? And if it's not, then come on, make it run. Let it do what it's supposed to do and fund it to the degree that you're supposed to fund it. You as a collective society has agreed that this is a requirement for us. And you need to fund the thing that you consider to be a requirement. Whether that's train, whether that's rail. I want me a Hyperloop. We're $20 trillion in debt. Are you telling me some of that $20 trillion could have went into building a goddamn Hyperloop? Or my flying fucking car? So much goddamn money. Jamal, they do the same thing here in Australia. It is a conservative ploy. They do this shit all over. They do it all over. Thor, Norwegian god, North's god, Jason Medeiros. Yes, Thor. God of goddamn thunder. The mighty Odin. I made that statement, and on federal level, debt makes no difference. Look, we are a weird organization. There's so many things that you can do. All of these problems are self-inflicted. They just are. It's, as a nation state, what is the point if you can't do basic things? Ruben Garcia, hey Jamal, about Correa. Didn't he turn out to be a fake leftist like Lula from Brazil? Yes, I'm aware of the pro-CIA fascists are regaining power in South America. I don't know. I honestly don't know. So my experience with him, and I'm biased here, which is why I said up front, well, I was like, bullshit, and then I had to pull myself back of like, well, maybe, I don't know. My experience with him has to do with Julian Assange, whereas he was militant about the sovereignty of Ecuador. Militant about it. Even to some degree felt like he had a chip on his shoulder about it, which I don't blame him. I mean, these countries were for the most part not colonized, but influenced greatly and harshly for 50, 60 years, like 100 years or more. So I can understand where it comes from the standpoint of we are a sovereign nation and you will treat us as such. And one of those ways he was able to flex his powers was, I'm giving in, Julian Assange Asylum. We're a nation state. If it was Switzerland, you'd respect it. You're going to respect it for us. Now, I don't know what that translates to from the standpoint of internal politics of Ecuador. I visited. I don't speak the language, and I wasn't able to communicate with people like talking about. No, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Yes. So one was a Democrat, one was a Republican. No. maybe I'm wrong on this. I had a conversation when I was in Ecuador. The gentleman who I was staying with, he said the president. There was one president. There were two parties, Democrat and Republican. This was beyond my political awakening of who this guy was, so it didn't click in a cognitive way. But he had to be talking about him, and he was explaining to me what was taking place from the standpoint of the politics, because I was there during the election. Um, they didn't seem excited about either. Didn't seem excited about either. So I don't know if he was a fake leftist. I don't know what he was, but at the very least, the guy who I was talking to wasn't all enthused about any of the people who were involved in the process. I don't know. I don't know. I have a bias towards him because of him putting his neck out for Assange. Whether these charges are true or not, I don't know. And not even whether they're true or not. Whether or not they would pay attention to them if it wasn't somebody else. I don't even know that. Like, for instance, if it was somebody who maybe didn't do that for Assange, maybe they would not have put this out, or would not have pressured this person, or would not have cared about it. This kind of unequal justice thing. I often say unequal justice is not justice. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure. You know, it's sad we have to even ask that, right? It's like fake leftists. The woman in the Democrat in Vermont. Is it Vermont? No, it's Rhode Island. Pro-life and an A rating for the NRA. Goddamn rhino. Oh, Dino. Democrat in name only. What's happening, Winkle? Rhino, worse, of course. We don't bother with too much diplomacy when it comes to Central America. No, we don't. Fuck, man. We don't at all. Think of what's taking place right now. In Nicaragua and in Venezuela, we have been putting an economic war on those countries. Going so far, if I'm not mistaken, even sanctions. So, I don't know about the sanctions, but definitely economic war from the standpoint of the financial markets. Trying to create this hysteria to come up with enough pretext for action. Now, the question is, will we take action in something like that? And I don't know, but I wouldn't necessarily put it past them. And that would be traumatic. That would be amazing. Ruben Garcia, that's a fair point, Jamal. Yeah. It's Ruben, it's one of those things. Somebody kind of pointed to my attention that I don't necessarily focus too much on South American politics. I can't read the language. And so I don't know, I can't peer into it in the same way I can peer into something that's in like the UK or in Europe. Let's see. All right. The Federal Reserve is a private corporation. That isn't right-wing fear-mongering. No, that's not right-wing fear-mongering. But it's a creature of Congress. Congress owns that, lock, stock, and barrel. It remains. Look, it's like fear of the filibuster from the standpoint of the Supreme Court. Yeah, it's fear. Nobody really fears the filibuster when you can rip that shit away in a heartbeat. It's kind of the same way. The only difference is there's no political will to do anything about the Federal Reserve. There's just not. And I got to be honest. I don't think the Federal Reserve is a problem. The system itself. The way we organize ourselves. The capitalistic way in which we organize ourselves. And they keep trying to find ways to put a muzzle on capitalism of saying we can try to reap the benefits without necessarily unleashing the monsters. Good luck with that. That has not proven to be all that well. You've these fucking terrors on the planet. It's funny that when the United States wants to overthrow a country, they never show the hot girls in the country on TV so that we think the country is full of ugly people worth destroying. Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. I don't know if that's true, but that's hilarious if it is. And it wouldn't be shocking. I mean, keep in mind, when you're talking about overthrowing a country, you're trying to get a propaganda out that something is so fundamentally wrong in the way that this country operates that we, the protectors, need to go in and kick some ass and change it back to what it's something else. What do you show? Do you show the people who are happy and glorious, or do you show the people who are scenes of violence and chaos? Yeah, you're not going to show the hot girls. You're not going to see beautiful women. And by the way, chaos. Like the Iranian thing, this model, they created a business model like God damn it, what is his name? Of a hitman, John Perkins. I think it's John Perkins. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He talks about this. How going into a country, creating these revolutions and fomenting these revolutions and putting somebody in who's essentially favorable and friends to us. United States is doing it now. The MEK, elements of the Democratic Party and Republican Party, support these guys. These guys are lunatics. They're actual terrorists that we support. I can't remember, I don't know the name of the Republicans, but top-notch Republicans are going speaking for their organization recently. Why do you do this? Why do they support this? Because ultimately, supporting this group gives them an in into those organizations. Into those countries. The same thing happened with Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a monster, but his party, the Ba'ath Party, was out monster as they overturned the previous government of that country, who was more egalitarian in the way he was going about his affairs. This is modus operandi. It's the way we go about taking down a country. You can write this shit down almost like in a handbook. The Monroe Doctrine. Yeah, for us, for this side of the globe, the Monroe Doctrine. Jamal, they only show the slums of countries as perfect propaganda. That's exactly what it is. Your captured audience. Ultimately, the information that you get for the most part is constrained within a certain narrative and view of the world with a somewhat of an American spin on it. It's like putting English on it, but instead of putting an American on it. And they put it out to the audience. So the mainstream is essentially given that particular view of the world. People start to accrue around a certain view of the world. Is it right? Who knows? Maybe. In some cases. In other cases, not so much. Think back in time to the things that were taking place that you know were fake. Gulf of Tonkin wasn't real. It wasn't real. Even if you want to talk about these chemical strikes in a way that they didn't have evidence for it. Matters comes out not having evidence for it. Didn't stop them from doing military strikes. Think about that. The President of the United States owned up to doing a military strike without having evidence for the thing that he was doing the strike for. It's problematic. Nobody cares. The media pushes out a narrative. And they pushes it over and over and over and over and over and over again. They never question this idea of whether or not what the United States is doing is right. Even though over multiple times in history, you could see that what they were doing wasn't necessarily all that right. Sinking of the Lusitania. Or sinking of the Maine. Same thing. Blame the Spanish. Use it as a proxy for another attack. What's the reality of it? The people at the time didn't get the reality. They got something else. And they got enough that would allow them to essentially take territories that belonged to Spain. Even the Iraq War, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. What about the killing of Osama bin Laden? What about that? That's another one. That's an outright lie. There's a lot of these. I guess my point is, during all of these, the media carried a different narrative than what was actually true. Only finding out later that, oh God, it was full of shit. It was full of shit. Alright, I'm going to end this one. Right, always fucking 11 though. See, that's funny. They do make a planned economy look unmanageable. Only unmanageable if constantly under attack by capitalists. Enrique, man. Tabitha, it's funny. We were talking about that earlier today. This thing of, do you need a bad guy? Because ultimately, if you ever try to get this kind of social economy, you're only... You know what? Fuck it. Let's have another video on that by itself. Yeah, I want to have another video on that because that kind of came up today. This thing of how do you have this kind of managed economy when you're always under assault by capitalist state? Because ultimately, if I am standing here, I need to trust you, and if I don't trust you, that means I got to get a knife because I think you got a knife. Anything that I do is somehow constrained by something that you do. Me losing in this, it's not so much that I lost as an absolute. It's more so that I lost in the game space to which you had a knife. There's a difference in those things, if that's what I'm saying. Let's end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. All right, I'm going to end this here. Thanks, guys. Y'all have a good night.